course, as usual, I am joined by the gentleman of mixed martial arts, the gentleman Josh Hill. And Josh, it's been quite a busy week, not only in the realm of mixed martial arts, but the world as a whole. There's a new president. We've lost some iconic television personalities like Alex Trebek, but let's move on. First of all, we can chat maybe a little bit about that towards the end, but let's move on to this past weekend with the UFC, where the light heavyweight division once again was the focus as Glover Teixeira took on Thiago Santos, and Thiago Santos coming back from 2 reconstructive knee surgeries, but looked good early. But, Glover Teixeira, 41 years young, found a way to get the finish in the 4th round with the rear naked choke, and Glover Teixeira making his case, Josh, for a light heavyweight title picture.
Yeah, man. I like seeing that. The old guys. It was like the theme of the card. All the old guys were getting the wins, which is pretty cool. Yeah, man. He's been a guy that's he climbed his way to the top once already. And fought for the title, and he's always just kind of been floating around, definitely in that top 10, usually top 5 spot. And then now he's put on a string. I think he's on a 5-fight win streak, I think.
Yeah, 4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah, so I think he's definitely, I think in my mind, earned himself another crack at the title. It reminds me very similar to Damian Maia when he went for his run, got another shot at Tyron Woodley. So I'd love to see him get the title opportunity.
Well, I mean, that does bring up the point, because last week we talked about Adesanya versus Blachowicz. You weren't feeling it at all, and now there's, potentially Glover Teixeira, who said, I'd like a title shot. Dana White said, yeah, he deserves a title shot, especially with the age being a factor. Yeah. But where do you see them going? Because honestly, knowing what I know about the UFC, they're going to probably stick with the Adesanya fight, even though you really can't leave Glover just hanging around. Will be potentially 42 if he gets that title shot by next year.
Yeah, I know, I understand it's business, and they're gonna do what makes them the most amount of money. But yeah, as far as age wise, he wants to get in there and get as many fights as he possibly can and get that title shot sooner than later. And if he has Adesanya fight, and I mean, if I was to put money down, I'd pick Adesanya to beat Blachowicz. Then you got a 2-division champ, which kind of clogs things up, which could take a long time. And then it might be even longer for Glover. So, I mean, just my biased opinion, I would want to see Glover fight for the title first, but we'll see what they do.
Yeah, I hope they do, and I think obviously Glover's earned it, and I thought the sport had gone away from the double division champion, as I said last week, because, I'm not normally the one that's like, oh, you're clogging up the division because it makes more business sense, but with Glover Teixeira and that division starting to pick up again with some contenders growing, it does hold up the division, as I think Teixeira, if anything, totally deserves the title shot. He's getting up there in age, and if you really wanted the real money fight versus John Jones at light heavyweight, why don't you just make that? And maybe they're saving it down the line with the title as being like the cherry on top. Nonetheless, I still think they should make the Teixeira Blachowicz fight. It doesn't sell you many pay-per-views, but it's the right fight to make and would be a solid co-main on any pay-per-view that they put on in 2021.
Yeah, I think so too. And my prediction, I think if the worlds all work together how they see it, I think they want Adesanya to go up, win the 205 title, John Jones go up to heavyweight, win that title, and then him come back down and then meet at 205. And then you're either going to have a double champ in Adesanya still, or you're going to have a double champ with Jones with the heavyweight and the light heavyweight, and that's the huge pay-per-view buy, right? So that's what I think they're probably hoping for if everything worked out, but who knows? A lot of things have to line up, and then Jones would have to beat Stipe for that to happen. But I mean, I think that's probably the overall goal or the biggest draw they could bring.
For sure, that's definitely the roadmap, I think. But I mean, if Adesanya and Jones are to fight, do they even really need the titles for it to be, I think, do well on pay-per-view and be one of the biggest fights of, per se, 2021 or whenever it happens?
I don't think so. No. I mean, majority of the people don't even know the champs that much. I mean, the belts are great, and they definitely they do have more notoriety and more pull and whatnot, but it's the namesake, right? Names are the biggest thing, and especially with the diehard fans, they know who the champs are and whatnot, but the casual fans, they just meant, oh, I know who Conor McGregor is, I know who John Jones is, and they'll tune in for that. But really, it doesn't have to be for the belt.
I think though, if you're Adesanya, right? So he just won the middleweight title and then wants to move up. And I get what he's doing and whatnot, but I think when you look at some of the names of the past, the reason they're so memorable in the sport, like a George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva, is because they stuck in their divisions, defended their titles multiple times, and that's what made their name and their legacy. Where if you're just hot shot in divisions and whatnot, I don't think that's great for the longevity of the sport and the weight class. And really, in the long run, it kind of hurts your name because everyone wants to see a champion defend their belt multiple times to truly make themselves one of the greats. And if you're just picking your spots and whatnot, I think that hurts an Adesanya legacy in the future, or not John Jones because he's done the work, but definitely an Adesanya.
Yeah, unless your name is Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson.
Wow.
And you know what I mean? And you get disrespected, you clean out your division, tenfold and beat everybody. And then still people, it's not good enough. And then people asked for him to go up, but, he didn't want to. Why? When he's got new contenders coming at him. So that was a one case where, a guy did stay in his division and it kind of went the opposite way as far as popularity and respect. But yeah, you're right. Some guys like I said, McGregor, Cejudo, they jump and they have two division champs. Don't really do anything with it. They don't defend it, and it kind of clogs things up.
Yeah, I think honestly though, on your Mighty Mouse point, it would be totally different if every title offense was like a solid finish. A lot of those he had to grind guys out for decisions, and they were just such one-handed beatings that hurt. If they were like first round or second round finishes, I think we'd be talking about Mighty Mouse in the UFC's run a little bit different. To me, one of the best champions that promotion's ever had. But Dana hated it and whatnot. Send him out to Asia to fight for ONE FC, and he's loving life out there now. So all the best to him. But I think that would totally have changed the narrative.
Yeah, to me, it wasn't. I could understand your point, and people like to see it. But I mean, he did have a lot of finishes too. A lot of submissions. He knocked out Joseph Benavidez. He finished Henry Cejudo. The crazy armbar submission was one of the best we've ever seen. So he's had a lot of finishes, and I think he's so technically just great everywhere, and especially defensively, where you're not going to see him in these big slugfests and rock'em sock'em type fights because he's smarter than that. He's a smart fighter. He's probably the best technically trained fighters there are right now. So I think he gets way more appreciation over on the eastern side of the world where they actually really pay attention to that more so. Where here in North America we're kind of more just like blood and guts.
Yeah, I think that's really what it comes down. We didn't appreciate the technical brilliance that was Demetrius Johnson. And you know what? It's one of those things you don't know what you got till it's gone, and now he's gone and fighting maybe one time a year for ONE FC right now. So, but yeah, that's we went down a whole different rabbit hole and whatnot. But those are the discussions you sometimes need to have. Yeah. But the only thing else really I thought noteworthy of the card this past weekend, Josh, was you said the old guys was the theme. Andrei Arlovski squeaking one out over tough Canadian heavyweight Tanner Boser. How'd you score the fight? I had it 29-28 for Boser, but the judges totally scored it for Arlovski based on him landing the bigger shots.
The bigger shots, yeah. It was a very close fight for sure. I'm not like, it wasn't like I was like, oh, it's a robbery. Definitely not. But yeah, it kind of just depends. You go back and forth. Does it go to the busier fighter, or does it go to the fighter that's doing the most damage and getting closer to finishing the fight, right? So it's hard to take account of what they go by to decide. But I'm a huge Arlovski fan, always have been. But Boser is Canadian, so I was pulling for Boser, and I think Boser is very, very good and has a bright future. Especially he moves so well for a heavyweight. He's very light on his feet. He moves like a welterweight. And so I think I still think he's gonna have a lot of success in that division.
I do too. I mean, he fought a guy that's been there, done that, seen everything imaginable. He just couldn't find a way to really get active. Like, he was picking apart the leg, but I think it just comes to the criteria of what some judges are looking for in those close fights. If you land the bigger shots, by default, you're going to win the fight. When I didn't see it that way, and I think most didn't see it that way, but nonetheless, Arlovski gets the win. I don't know where you go with Arlovski from here, But you know what? The Arlovski train just keeps on rolling, and I'm still impressed that he's able to, at his age, with how many wars and how many serious knockouts he's taken, that he's able to continue to go out there and fight these tough up and comers and come away with victories.
He's the I mean, him and Alistair Overeem are both doing it. Both guys have been around forever. Both guys have finished a lot of guys. Both guys have themselves been knocked out many of times. But actually, I think I heard Rogan talking about this, but they both seem to not show any signs of any type of trauma or like CTE or anything like that, despite being knocked out many, many times and being in the sport for this long. So, I mean, that's a good thing. That's a good sign. But yeah, I mean, just he said he wants to fight. I seen in an interview or he wants to fight for a while still. What is he, 40? What, 42? 40?
Yeah, I thought he was like 42, 41, the same kind of age as Texiera. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, usually like the heavyweights too, they tend to stick around longer because there's usually, anyways, I'm not saying everybody, but there's less movement involved. That they don't have to rely on speed as much. Compared to the smaller guys. So usually you see guys that on their heavyweight, they stick around till they're in their 40s, or if not, sometimes later, like we're going to see with Tyson and Roy Jones coming up.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I hate that they've made it like an exhibition. I really just wanted them to make it like an official fight, like the full 5-minute rounds or whatever it is for boxing. Like they made it a
5, bro.
It's 3, right? Yeah, so it's 3, but they made it 2-minute rounds because it's an exhibition. But yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, I prefer it. I understand them doing it just because that 3-rounders, that 2 minutes is a little bit more of a sprint. So it's a little bit less on the cardio factor due to their age, but it's going to be a full out fight. Both guys, they say it's an exhibition, but it's just they're going to go out there and fight.
I hope so as well. I mean, that card in itself is a mishmash of stuff for everyone. Where you have the hardcore fans that there's a couple fights for them. There's like people that just grew up with Tyson and Jones that want to see that, and then there's stuff for like the YouTubers fans with like the Jake Paul or whatever. He's gonna be on the card fighting former NBA player Nate Robinson. I mean, it's a weird card, but it has something for everyone.
Yeah, it's a bit of a circus, but I mean, hey, that's kind of cool and interesting, I guess. I don't know who the YouTubers are. I don't never follow, but I heard about it. But yeah, I mean, it's going to draw more eyeballs, so that's what they want.
I mean, stepping back in the ring draws like every eyeball.
Yeah, that's all you need, really. Yeah.
Exactly. Tyson could be in there against any, like me, and it would sell paper. But yeah, your point though on Arlovski and the damage he's taken, because I think that shows the difference between boxing and MMA, where a lot of his knockouts have been those one punch, like the Fedor one's memorable because he was going for the jumping knee, but that does show how much safer sport of mixed martial arts than boxing, where boxing you're accumulating all those power shots to the head, where in MMA you take 1 or 2 and then the ref will hopefully most of the time, and for our officer's case that has happened, help you out and stop the fight.
Yeah, that's I'm interested to see. I don't think they've done a real study yet. If they have, I just don't know about it, but it'd be interesting to see. And MMA is still very, very young, so we'll see in like 10, 20 years. If I do agree with your point. I think when somebody does get stopped in MMA, there's no 8 count. There's no standing count. So if a guy's unconscious, pretty much gets back to his feet and he's able to keep fighting, and then takes more and more damage, more and more damage, more and more damage, and the accumulation of just head trauma, right? Like when you're boxing, you can punch. You're just punching and you punch the body, you punch the head. But in mixed martial arts, obviously there's knees, there's elbows, there's kicks, there's grappling, wrestling. So you're not just taking constant trauma to the head. So I think that does play into it, and I think that's why you get knocked out is not good. Definitely, you don't want to be doing that all the time. But I think it's better than taking consecutive shots accumulating into more brain damage.
And as well, I think there's a certain group of referees that'd rather stop the fight earlier than later. And I know they get crapped on social media, but for me, sometimes when you can see a guy's about to go, I'd rather the ref stop it earlier to prolong the guy's career for another 10, 15 fights or whatever, than just him getting highlight reel knocked out or anything like that. Like I'm happy to see we're seeing a generation of officials like that, because there was a time where we had refs that were literally letting people get pummeled into oblivion.
See, I understand that, and I agree, and that is good. The fighter in me, there is a lot on the line, and I'd rather just go out on my shield, make sure I'm done, because if you happen to stop the fight early, and I'm still all there, and I can keep going, like that puts an L on my record, that puts me back, a long time now to get that fight back. It takes away half my money, so there's lots of things on the line that have to playing a factor. But that's why I would not want to be a referee, man. That's the hardest job in the sport.
Well, it's also good, I mean, to get your perspective, someone that's in the cage that, luckily you haven't had to worry about that. You're the one handing out the L's on the other side normally when you get in there, Josh. But, it's always good to get that perspective because that's just the fan in me. And, safety is what I want. I'm not one of those to the death type of guys.
No.
It's always to me been about the sport aspect of it. But yeah, but moving on to this upcoming weekend with the UFC, Josh, I wasn't really going to touch on this until this story broke. It was, we were supposed to have Rafael Dos Anjos versus Islam Makhachev, but Makhachev pulls out, and it looks like we're not going to have Dos Anjos have a fight until Paul Felder comes from the announce desk to inside the octagon to take on Rafael Dos Anjos, and what makes this a much more interesting main event. Personally, I know the plan was to get Makhachev rolling at 155, but he's out. Felder's in here for a quick turnaround, or not a quick turnaround, but a comeback against a dangerous guy still in Dos Anjos, and I expect this one to be fireworks.
Yeah, I like this, man. I love both guys. My biggest question was with Felder taking it on 5 days notice or whatever it was. Is it at 55 still?
Yeah, 155.
It is, eh? I mean, so then he must have still been training and been in pretty good shape because I know he is a very big lightweight. So yeah, he must have been in good shape and felt that obviously he can make the weight and he's good enough to take the fight on such short notice. But props to him, man. I seen his post. He said pretty much has nothing to lose. And I agree with him. Get in there, take a shot, beat a guy like RDA, who is a former champion, a huge name, and in a division that's full of killers. Like I think, I think bantamweight and lightweight's the two hottest divisions right now. And yeah, that would be, imagine if he pulls off the win, that's huge for him. So all the power to him. I love seeing it, and that's an awesome fight, man. It's an interesting fight.
That's the thing. It makes this is such an interesting fight. Like, don't get me wrong, Makhachev and Dos Anjos would have been interesting, and especially for Makhachev to take on, the guy with the credentials that you just ran down in Dos Anjos. But for Felder, he was supposed to be the color guy on this card for this Saturday, and he steps from the booth right into the cage, takes this fight, and Felder's always known to have those exciting fights, and I think it can draw out the extra exciting style fight for Dos Anjos. So I'm all for it, and they're two good names as well because, no offense to Abdul Razak Al Hassan and Chaos Williams, not many people really know who you are and would be tuning in to for this card, and that would have been the main event, but we're here now, and I'm very excited. I'm excited to see Felder because he's coming off that fight in February before the pandemic and everything, so it feels like 2 years ago against Dan Hooker, where it was a real competitive back and forth until Hooker just was a little too much for him.
Yeah, I'm a big Felder fan, man. I love seeing the commentating and fighting. That's pretty cool. I'm kind of following in his footsteps. I'm trying to anyway. So I like that and his fighting style, man. He's a well-rounded, but obviously known for his striking prowess, and he's always a game fighter. So RDA, is good everywhere. So I think this makes for an interesting one. We'll just see. It's going to be 5 rounds, right? I think.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that, if it does get into the, 4th and 5th round, if Felder can keep the gas tank going, just because he's took the fight on such short notice. But we'll see what happens.
Where does Felder go from here? Because I personally thought when he announced his retirement, I pretty much thought he was done because he had the sweet gig with the broadcasting. He's one of the best color guys the UFC has. But if he wins, he's like right in the mix now at 155.
Yeah, it's huge for him. I think that puts him right up. Like I said, that division stacked. You got Khabib's retired, I guess, but then you got McGregor, Poirier, Ferguson, Chandler now, Hooker, RDA, and there was another big name at the top there. But there's like 8 at the top there. Islam, who was supposed to fight. But yeah, it puts him right back in that mix, man. And I think he could, if he gets this win, he could get a top 5 guy.
I think if he gets the win, it totally changes his perspective on fighting because he's really just doing this to save the card. He wins, he's got to get that mindset back of I can be a fighter again and maybe make a run at it. So I think that is what makes this card 10 times more exciting to watch. I mean, there's some up and coming names on this card, but really of the UFC cards we've seen as of late, not a lot of household names.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to see that. And I just like the story of it too. Like, could you imagine 5 days notice, like saving a BTC card or something? It's something you could do. Put me in, coach.
Yeah, I liked it. Who did that in PFL? Sean O'Connell, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew he was fighting that night, but he went on the booth and he commentated the first few fights, and then he'd say, "All right, boys, got to go warm up." Takes his stuff off, and then hops in the cage, and then I think came back afterwards too. So
he did, all bloody and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. That would be something that would be really cool to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes it 10 times cool. I kind of wish it was like, well, got to go from the booth like how O'Connell did in the PFL. But, yeah. Speaking of, I guess, the PFL, we can get to this now, is we knew in 2020 they were shutting down once the pandemic happened, but they're now starting to let their fighters, fight elsewhere. I know Muhammad Usman fought internationally. He was supposed to fight in the heavyweights. He fought in Titan, actually. Supposed to be in the heavyweights for them. But the big thing now is that Kayla Harrison, one of their top draws, is making her first attempt to fight at 145 pounds in Invicta FC in 2 weeks' time, November the 20th. And Josh, I mean, it's like the PFL, they're finally letting their fighters go do this, but it seems like too little too late.
Yeah, that's a tough situation that they're in. It's a tough for the fighters. I can understand their frustration, and I can understand where the promotion's coming from, just because the way their format is. We spoke on it briefly before. It is difficult because it's a seasonal type thing. It's not just a random event. So you do have to have some progression, and it takes time. And with the pandemic, they just scrapped the whole thing, which sucks. But I seen in a recent article, it says the PFL is letting their fighters fight elsewhere except for the UFC and Bellator. Yeah. So I can kind of understand them doing that just because it's like the top tier competition. But a lot of smaller shows aren't going to be able to pay the PFL guys what they're getting there. So a lot of those guys aren't going to want to go fight for peanuts somewhere else in a smaller show. So it kind of doesn't, with the exception of Invicta, it kind of doesn't really give a lot of options for the guys. Guys like Lance. You know what I mean? I know Lance isn't going to go fight some regional show, you know what I mean, with his career and his record. So it sucks. I don't know, man. It's a tough situation because those guys, they're taking a year off their career, sitting on the sidelines, and not only not getting paid. I mean, they're getting very minimal pay to keep them afloat for the year, but they're not being able to perform, man. And a year off your career is a long time in this sport.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. But to me, I just thought the timing was so interesting, considering it was like Lance Palmer and Kayla Harrison have like filed lawsuits against the PFL for taking time away from their career when they shut down for the 2020 season. And then it's like, oh, Kayla, you can now go fight for Invicta. So I found that timing just to be, pretty rich.
Yeah.
Which obviously it's like, please don't sue us. We kind of need you to come back. So, and the plan is from the PFL for Kayla, at least she'll be back at 155 pounds. But I mean, it's good for Kayla, and it's good for her to at least try the weight cut down to 10 pounds from 155 to 145. Because if she wants to make it to, once her PFL contract's done, if she wants to go to the UFC, they don't have a women's 155. So the biggest they have right now is women's 145. And if that division wants to stay afloat, they'll need a name like Kayla Harrison.
Yeah, 45 is not a deep division as it is in any promotion really for the women. So 55 is like four girls. You know what I mean? It's very, very small. So
it's an MMA unicorn.
yeah, it is, man. So for her, I mean, PFL, I mean, if she can just stay there her whole career and continue to get paid, I mean, I would do it. You know what I mean? But yeah, if she wants to drop down and have bigger challenges, then yeah, she'd have to go to 45.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what the UFC's waiting on. I know they just had Amanda Nunes and Megan Anderson pushed back until early 2021. It was supposed to be in December, but that division pretty much hinged on the result of that. Like if Megan Anderson won, pretty much the division at least has some life to it. If Amanda comes out there and crushes Megan, they may as well just shut it down. But if you have the likes now of Kayla Harrison down the pipeline, fighting for like a feeder type promotion that Invicta has been, obviously she'll be back in the PFL next year, but once that contract's up, then the UFC can totally make an act for it and prove, there's another name there. And a super fight, a lot of people are interested in it for the women's 145 and Nunes and Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, I think us fans, real fans, are interested in that. As far as the casuals and the people that don't watch anything but the UFC, they probably won't even really know who Harrison is. We know who she is and how good she is, and it would be a huge injection into the division for the UFC at 145. But that's it's still a long time away because she's obviously still under contract with PFL. And who's to say she won't? Who's to say she will jump ship and join the UFC, right?
I mean, that's true. There's a lot still to be determined because the PFL, they have to have that season in 2021, and we're just not there yet. As much as we want to fast forward through the rest of 2020, we can't do that, unfortunately. But that I just thought that was interesting. I just thought the timing, more importantly, was so interesting, especially a month or so after this lawsuit had been filed. That you're fighting somewhere else, just how I looked at it. But moving on, Josh, Bellator 252 this upcoming weekend, or this coming Thursday, as they continue to roll on the Thursday on CBS Sport Networks. The Grand Prix is back. The Featherweight Grand Prix is back. We have not one, but two Grand Prix fights, as Daniel Weichel will take on Emmanuel Sanchez, and the Featherweight title itself on the line as Patricio Pitbull defends against Pedro Carvalho. First of all, I'm so happy to see this Grand Prix back. Because I think how they've done this Grand Prix and everything has been the best Grand Prix that Bellator has put together, and we get some really good fights with Weichel, Sanchez, and Carvalho taking on Pitbull for the featherweight title.
Yeah, this Grand Prix and tournaments take a long time regardless, but with the pandemic, it just made it seem like it's been 5 years. You know what I mean? But yeah, both these fights are awesome. And the Sanchez and Wenchel, that's a good one, really good one. If I had to pick, I'm gonna go with Sanchez. Just I think he'll gut it out and kind of win down the stretch. And then with Pitbull and Carvalho, I'm gonna go with the favorite, and I'm gonna say Pitbull retains his title. But again, that's a good scrap. But yeah, that's these two fights, and then I think there's one more with McGee and Caldwell. And then we should kind of get close to the finish line here.
Yeah, I would assume they would try to be finding a way to wrap it up by early 2021.
Yeah.
But I'm just like I said, I'm happy to see it back. And I like how in these Grand Prix that Bellator's done, they put the champion in there and he has to defend his belt. They're not non-title fights. The belt is on the line. So that's like double the stakes here for the champion in Patricio Pitbull.
Yeah, it's kind of cool how that happens. In every single bracket, there's a title fight. Usually that never happens. Usually it's either the title holder kind of sits out and waits for the winner of the tournament, or it's a vacant title or something like that. But it's kind of unique to see the title, could potentially pass a couple of hands throughout the whole tournament, or continue to stay on Pitbull's ways if he keeps winning. But it just kind of adds another element to the tournament.
Yeah, I just love how they've been putting these Grand Prix together. The whole issue I've had with them is just the length. This year, Bellator, they get a pass because the world stopped and they had a lot longer layoff than any of the other promotions. But, I'm happy to see it back. And they're good quality fights. I think when we get the McKee-Caldwell fight, that's the one I'm looking forward to the most, which I believe is in a couple weeks or maybe even next Thursday.
Next week, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's the one I'm really excited for because Caldwell's been one of the guys they've really built up well, was a former champion at, I believe, was it Bantamweight, right? Yep. Yeah, so he's now gone up, and I think McKee is the best prospect that Bellator really has right now. He can do it in the cage. He's got a personality. So that one I'm so excited for. We'll get into it more next week. But, the Grand Prix is back. There's a couple other interesting fights on this card. Aaron Pico's back, and it's always good to see Pico fight. And he's a guy that seems to have found his way, his foothold in mixed martial arts after some slips early on.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think he's just so talented everywhere. His wrestling is his biggest attribute, but his striking too he's a very, very good striker. He's got a lot of power, and I think he kind of got that wrestler taste of knocking people out and became a striker. You know what I mean? And then he, got into some firefights and, got tagged and knocked out a couple times. And then I think he kind of reevaluated things and made the adjustments and said, why am I going out there and not utilizing my best attribute, which is my wrestling? And then you've seen that in his last fight. He looked way more composed, used his wrestling and then got the submission victory. I think it was a submission. And yeah, I think you're going to see more of the same in this fight. You're just going to see a more well-rounded guy that's using all of his tools and not just relying on his hands. So I'm always interested to see him fight. That guy's got a lot of skill, and I think he could go very far.
Yeah, he's fighting a tough guy in John De Jesus, who's looked really good in his Bellator debut back in August. So I'm excited for it. It's a good fight for Pico to continue the progression for him as well against a guy with around over 20 pro fights. So it's a good one. And Bellator, they're back on these Thursdays, and watching these Thursday cards, they're fun, and I'm happy to see them on Thursday because it's a full night for just Bellator. I just wish when they moved to CBS Sports, they would have done something different production-wise, because it just feels the same. And just a move to a new network, usually they present some different production element, but for Bellator, nothing different. And that's just going to be, I think, hard to draw people in.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess if it's working, then don't change it, I guess. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'd like to see just some more pizzazz, some flair in going into a new network, kind of like more of like a we're here type thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, hey, I'm not in charge of that, right?
Yeah, but if you were, you definitely agree with me. The only, I guess, the major change a lot of people want to see is they put the fighter names up for only a little bit and take them away, where every other promotion has their names up for the entire fight. Maybe do that, just especially because some of these guys, a lot of people don't know.
True. Yeah, I agree with that. I do like seeing both the names and the trump colors to tell who is in there, just to, for somebody that doesn't know who they are, coming in and being like, who's this guy? Who's this guy? I think that is key for sure.
Be Bellator this Thursday. I mean, as you said, the Grand Prix's back, but that's pretty much the round table of MMA. I mean, I guess today as well, they did make it official. Conor McGregor will be taking on Dustin Poirier for UFC 257, January 23rd, an event they created just for this fight. And I mean, there's your more interest at 155, as we talked about in the Felder Dos Anjos fight. This one obviously has the more eyeballs because Conor's involved against a really tough guy. But now I've seen Michael Chandler trying to egg on Tony Ferguson to get that potentially be the co-main.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think they have to have, if those two are for sure fighting now, they have to have, I'd say, Chandler fight against Ferguson or Gaethje, or Gaethje versus Ferguson as the co-main. Also, in case something happens and one of the guys pulls out, there's also another fight that you can kind of mix in there too. But yeah, having those four as the main and co-main, that'd be one hell of a card.
For sure. I mean, I just can't wait to see Michael Chandler get in there because, like we talked about, the UFC presented him as a star, like a big deal that they signed away from Bellator, even though obviously they didn't name drop Bellator, but they presented him like he's a big deal. So that's at least a positive, as we've mentioned before. Like, some of these guys that come in from other promotions, they just treat them like meh, and then they get, lose a couple fights and then they're out of there. Where Chandler, they're treating like the piece de resistance, and I just want to see him get in there. And he's of the quality that can handle any of those top guys in the lightweight division that the UFC has.
Yeah, and like we talked about, I'm glad they did that with him because he is a big star. He was Bellator's main guy for years. And he is the top quality guy. He is a top 5 lightweight in the world, and I think he can compete with those guys. And it's going to be interesting to see what Michael when he's on. He's like very, very, he's on. I mean, and he'd be very, very hard to beat. We've seen in a few of his fights in the past where he was different in the cage. I mean, that just might have been, that particular fight or whatnot. But when Chandler's on, and as of the recent, he's been on. So I'm really excited to see him step up and fight a guy like a Gaethje or like a Tony. That would be, I think that'd be cool.
For sure, especially Gaethje, because that one could totally be like another version of the first Alvarez-Chandler fight that
Yeah.
Bellator had, which is still the best fight the promotions had.
Yeah.
And if that's in the UFC, it's magnified tenfold. Both guys just swinging for the fences and both nearly finished. I don't know. That's just, I guess, wishful hoping that they eventually get to meet down the line, because I think that fight has that potential. But yeah, Chandler obviously being promoted as the star, and you said when he's on because he can put your lights out early, especially what he did to Benson Henderson recently. Like, that's impressive. But he's also a guy that's had some weird bad luck, like that ankle thing at Madison Square Garden. Like, he's been both ends of it in MMA and all through Bellator. So now he's kind of prepared himself for the highest of high right now, whatever UFC presents to him.
Yeah. Like I said, he had that little rough run where he had that ankle thing happen. He had that loss to Will Brooks, and then he lost to Pitbull. Pitbull clipped him coming up from 45. But yeah, other than that, man, that guy's like you said, the war with Alvarez early in his career. He's been top notch. I love seeing him fight. He's always been one of my favorite lightweights.
For sure. And I mean, we'll hopefully get to see him fight in January on this UFC 257 card. But moving on from, just MMA as a whole, Josh, it's been a heck of a week. I'm sure there's been the most politics that's been on my TV for the past long time, just trying to figure out who the heck would be president. And finally, we have that figured out. And I don't know. I mean,
well, we'll see.
Apparently, we'll see. But I just think there's no turning back. We've gone too far.
Yeah, I don't know about that, bro. I don't know. I'm not a huge Trump supporter, and I'm definitely not a huge Biden supporter. I don't see myself as a liberal or a conservative. I kind of fall between the middle. I agree with some things they do and some things they do, and then some that I definitely don't think, and vice versa. But yeah, it's been crazy. It's been a shit show. I mean, American politics is always more dramatic and interesting than Canadian politics. We have our own issues in Canada that I wish more Canadians focused on, because they just tend to focus on the U.S. politics only. And I understand, like I said, it is more dramatic, and it's way more in your face because the media just shoots it out there constantly. But yeah, it's been crazy, man. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next month, even more so after all this now.
I just think, like, if I don't need to see any more, let's take a look in the updates on the counts. Like, counting has never seemed more important in the past week. And John King on CNN with his board, that man was a master of television, because he was literally talking about the same thing for 4 days straight, for hours upon hours. And I don't know, like, we couldn't have had a break or anything like that. I understand it's important, but we were literally days we were just talking about the same thing over and over again. But it seems like it's over, more importantly. Like, the president-elect is moving on and already kind of seems like he's running the country, while one side's still trying to figure this out. I don't know. Whatever. There's one state for sure that's a recount, which is Georgia. But
yeah, I think you're going to see quite a few. And it's interesting that they did push that as like he's the president now, when if he's not officially, you know what I mean? So I think they're just kind of trying to make it seem like, yeah, he won 100%, it's all done, there's no turning back, he is your next president. And then I think there's gonna be some, I mean, like I said, I'm not a huge into the politics type thing, but it's kind of hard to not be nowadays, you know what I mean, because it's all over the place. But I think there's going to be some interesting shit happen within the next month. I've talked to a lot of left-wingers who are obviously all for this, and then I've talked to a lot of right-wingers that are, that love Trump, and they bring up some valid points, to be honest. And listening to them, what they say, it should be pretty interesting.
It's going to be a wild finish to this Trump presidency. I think you're right. It's going to be the craziest transition of power that America's ever seen, and it's pretty much straight out of pro wrestling. Let's be real. It's right out of that.
You know what? You're right. Yeah. And depending on who your babyface and who your heel is, you're rooting for the good guy versus the bad guy, or vice versa. And that is, I think, has never been more apparent than it is in 2020.
I think more importantly as well, what's been more determined, the U.S. election system sucks. Like, could you imagine if our Canadian election system was like, we're waiting on that count in Fredericton? As long as it took.
There's a lot of flaws, definitely. The pandemic has not helped anything, obviously, of course. That just added layers of bullshit they have to deal through with. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely not a good system to begin with.
It's definitely time for election reform in America. I know they keep talking about it for all these years. No, this was the year it really determined, please fix your system because it's broken. But the last thing before I let you go, we lost a TV icon in the world, really. Canadian, Alex Trebek, the host of Jeopardy from, 1984 till up until now. This guy that hosted many other game shows, but obviously known for Jeopardy. And, he was battling pancreatic cancer for a while. Looked like he'd beat it, but unfortunately, once it's stage 4, there's not a lot coming back from. But, I guess really just your thoughts, Josh, on Alex Trebek, because whether you may be like a diehard Jeopardy watcher or not, you've watched Jeopardy at least enough in your life where he's been an impact and always been in your living room at some point.
Oh, yeah, man. That's very sad news, Dad. I'm a huge Alex Trebek fan. Growing up, my grandma's house, Jeopardy was on every night, and just hearing that voice in my head as a kid, it's always going to be ingrained in me. And I do like Jeopardy. I do watch it from time to time. Whenever I see it on, I'll watch it. But yeah, he was just, it was awesome at what he did. But also just getting, even after he died, I kind of watched some pieces on him and learned a little bit more about him that I didn't know. And he just seemed like a really good dude. So that's a big loss. And yeah, pancreatic cancer at stage 4 at that age, the odds of survival are pretty damn slim. But he did last a lot longer than most people thought or do. I think he was like 18 months or something like that. So he got and he continued working. That's the coolest thing. I like that, man. He didn't stop what he did, and he continued to work even through his pain and shit. And I think that's pretty admirable. And he went out, kind of doing what he loved, which is pretty cool.
I couldn't believe he was 80. He didn't look 80 at all. 80 years old. But yeah, like Jeopardy, always a constant on in my house. Like for me, when I went away for college, it was like the first time, like there was a couple of shows that were like made you feel at home. One was Sports Center. One was like Seinfeld, and then it was 7:30 Jeopardy. You'd hear his voice, and it'd make you feel humble. And it's a sad loss for TV because that guy's been a constant forever. It's gonna be really weird to see whoever hosts it now. Because do you even bring the show back, or do you give it a year off? He's so iconic.
Yeah, I would say if they're gonna get a replacement, which is going to be very, very difficult to do, they got to take some time off and let time pass, and then kind of maybe revamp it. But yeah, like even if you look at like Bob Barker with Drew Carey, I mean, Drew Carey's good. I like Drew Carey, but it's definitely not the same as it once was. And Bob Barker's still alive too. So that's the big difference. But Alex Trebek is, he is Jeopardy, man, like they said. So it'll be really weird to see somebody else doing that role.
It's crazy too with the game show. Because game shows have had like different hosts and whatnot. This guy, they were like, here, you're going to host this show on like whatever it's premiered in 1984. And he still hosted it. That is how you were really good at your job. When you were the face, the voice of the show. And it's a real sad loss. And, as we said, Trebek, Canadian, big hockey fan. Did something with like every Canadian franchise, it seemed like. So real sad. Rest in peace, Alex, and hate to once again end the show on a sad note like that. But,
seems to be the trend in 2020 here, right?
It really does, unfortunately. So yeah, rest in peace, Alex. And before I let you go, Josh, plug yourself out there, and we'll be back next week to break it all down in the realm of MMA.
Yeah, as always, at Gentleman J Hill. I'll do a shout out to, I know tomorrow night Scott Hudson, Ryan Dixon are fighting for that XFC. And yeah, so best luck for those guys. Always good to see Canadian guys fighting. So.
Yeah, and most of those guys' fights are free on fight.tv on the prelims, so you don't have to pay through the pay window. You get to see them fight live and free for this great platform that the XFC has given not just these American fighters, but a lot of international and especially the Canadian guys.
For sure. Awesome. I can't wait to watch that.
Well, Josh, that is going to wrap it up here for this episode of Jason and the Gentleman, and we'll chat next week and break it all down yet again.
Sounds good, brother.